Really what this class is about is trying to figure out how to make the most of different types of images and how do we get to these tools in order to make our images come alive and pop and have something to them. One of my favorite quotes about photography is by Marc Reboux, the French photographer, who said, "Photography is savoring life at 1/100th of a second." And so that's my goal in this class, is how do we kind of savor life more and use software to help in that process. We use Photoshop and Lightroom, some Camera Raw too, a little bit as well. The goals for this session are to look at some raw processing techniques, basic controls, selective adjustments, batch processing, and exploring how we can improve and enhance color. Then Photoshop will do a little bit of retouching work, some color and tone, and sharpening, and kind of look at this core set of tools to see how we can improve our photographs. These are some of the types of things that we'll be doing. Like I said, some Camera Raw stuff, some Lightroom stuff, and we'll get to all of that. Before we begin, inspiration. What I find is that trying to find out what inspires you is equally as important as getting good at the tools. What I mean by that is this, is finding what your thread is as a photographer, whatever type of photographer you are. So Henry Cartier-Bresson said that his photography was yes, yes, yes to life. It was a huge yes. Sebastião Salgado, who does, oh, there's a typo there, sorry about that, but who does a lot of international work, and he'll photograph atrocities of the world, but his thread is dignity. He's always trying to say, how can I bring dignity to the situation, even if it's horrible? And so what we have to do is ask ourselves, well, what's our thread, and then how do we use software to get there? Does that make sense? Otherwise, what we're doing is just imitating other people. We're like, well, I'll just like make it blue. And it's like, well, no, why? Well, maybe I want it to be reflective and poetic, and that's my thread. I'm all about poetry, and so I don't use a lot of contrast because poetry is a softer voice, whatever it is. All right, next is a couple links to some of the other things I do. All right, well now let's get started and dive right in with a conversation about color and tone. And to kick things off, I actually am going to jump to Camera Raw from Bridge. So in Bridge, I press Command-R. That opens an image up in Camera Raw. That's easy to remember. Command's a big shortcut. R is for raw. That's Control-R on Windows. And I want to talk about the histogram and the interactive histogram of both of these tools. This is a picture of a Japanese friend down at the beach at this great spot, but exposure's way off. So we can use sliders, which a lot of us know, but another way to get familiar with the histogram and to understand what it does is to click into it and drag. And clicking into and dragging the histogram, what I've found in my own workflow, kind of connects me with what the slider is doing. You saw that it just moved my shadow slider. Of course, I could have just gone there, but this also says like, oh yeah, now I'm kind of seeing what's up there in that area. And we can do other things like exposure and see how we're shifting the full histogram all the way over to the right and how it's changing the characteristics of it. If you're wondering, which I don't think any of you are because we've been talking a little bit, but what the heck is a histogram? It's just a visualization of the information we have in our photograph. And I've found to get good at your images, understanding what that little thing is helps out. Greatest way to do that, click and drag. This kind of an image to bring out its best, I think, really starts with the shadows and then probably our highlights. And our highlights are over here. We can drop those down. See that background comes into play a little bit. And we have a better exposure. And why does exposure matter? It's kind of an important topic, right? Because the eye goes to brightness, as we've talked about, areas of color and sharpness. And if I were to just reset this for a moment, the guy's lost. Like, it was supposed to be about the guy, but he's lost. And so what I want to do is bring him back. Let's look at that in Camera Raw. I'll talk quick here in the beginning because I'm going to get into the basics and then we'll get more advanced. I'm going to go D for develop, open up the histogram. Same kind of thing here, right? It's just the same deal. Let's close this side so we have more image space. Let me get this set. There we go. Same kind of thing. So we bring up exposure, bring up my exposure and my shadows, and then drop those highlights down. And the other trick, I think, with getting an image to a good spot is trying to almost listen to it and try to say, like, well, what are you trying to say, image? Like, what are you about? And this one, it's about the guy. And the environment's really important. And so I need to pay attention to that. You know, contrast can bring back some of those things. Clarity is an interesting one. And let's exaggerate for a moment. We've all seen things like this, but lots of clarity adds mid-tone contrast. I think of clarity, if it were a hammer, it's like a finishing hammer. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a small little hammer you use to put a little nail in your wall when you hang a frame up. Versus contrast is like the big, huge, like sledgehammer. Boom, and it does a lot. So clarity does these little things, and trying to figure out what those little things are is really important. With this image, we see get mid-tone contrast. Maybe let's zoom in on the guy a little bit, but we also lose color. That can be helpful, but if you want the color, the trick is to think of clarity and vibrance as brother and sister, and when one crosses the street, he grabs the other hand of the other one, or she grabs his hand, whatever, and they pull each other along. So if your clarity goes up and you want to maintain the original color, so will your vibrance slider. So just try to mentally connect those two. We'll talk a little bit more about those sliders later. Right now, though, really it's about the histogram and dragging around to try to improve exposure. In Lightroom, as I've said before, but I'll say again, the shortcut to see before and after we have is our backslash key, which gives us that before, and then backslash key, again, gives us the after. All right, let's get more into how we can improve pictures and look at another example here. This one, kind of on the surfing theme. You can tell I enjoy this sport a lot. I live in Santa Barbara, which is amazing, and because we have beautiful ocean and mountains, and anyway. So here's this image, and what I'm going to do with this one is just kind of walk through what we might do with our workflow. Cropping is an essential part of photography, and some photographers, especially at the school where I taught, and I've taught for over a dozen years at a really good photography school, will say, you crop on camera. You never crop afterwards. Get it right on camera. And we know that, right? But yet it doesn't always happen. And so what I try to say is, yes, get it right on camera, and then if you don't, keep working it, and try to ask yourself, what would you have done? With this image, I think it's just a little bit tighter and trying to find the right way to have that energy of this moment. There's lots of ways we could have done that. When you get to the crop tool, the R key gets you there. The overlay graphic that we have is the O key, and that just shows us these different overlay grids. Sometimes those are helpful. What tends to happen, though, is we'll see the grid there, but no one else will. And so I like to turn it off eventually. The H key is our shortcut for hiding things like that. So even if you have a really fancy overlay grid, the golden mean or something, just hit the H key so you can say, okay, will this work without that, right? Then we want to apply the crop, double click inside there, and it will apply that to the photograph. All right, we can, of course, use our basic controls. These are very similar in Lightroom and Camera Raw. Here what I'm doing is just a touch of exposure, a little bit of contrast. I almost always like contrast, but that's because I know what I want my images to be. Remember savoring life? Think of something that you're savoring. It's like delicious, and I don't want it to be the like sweetness. I want it to be delicious. There's a difference there. So that determines my level of contrast, as weird as that sounds. A little bit of shadows, and then if I bring in the contrast or the clarity for this one, with action sports and ocean and those kind of things, vibrance really helps out pretty well. Now with this image, what I want to do, let me just close this up so it's a little bigger. With this image, his skin's a little bit off. And skin tone is tricky in digital capture, as we've mentioned. We have a great area we can go the HSL controls to begin to dial that in. Hue, saturation, and luminance. So the hue sliders, and perhaps I should do something more dramatic like the blues, we can change the ocean green or purple, which I don't want to do. We can also modify their color if we want the colors to drop out, that particular color, or if we want it to just come up a little bit. So we can selectively choose those. In this case, the skin, I'm looking to take a little bit of red and yellow out, or red and orange out, and then brighten them up. So I'm in the luminance sliders now. When you brighten something up, it loses color, and that makes sense. Think of as light gets brighter and brighter and brighter, we have less and less of that. So I'm just trying to take that down a little bit to get it to a better spot. All right, so here we are, go back to our controls. Looks like it's a little too dark. I need to open the image up. And it's always tricky to work on your images, at least for me, when I'm talking. I don't know if any of you tried that, like watch I'm doing, because the best image making happens, I think, in quiet, when you're really in the zone. That being said, Here's our kind of where we've gotten this image. And that before and after didn't work because I had done something previously. But you get the idea of how we're bringing this image, listening to it, taking it out, and we're connecting it to our thread, which is the way that we want to make photographs. And so it fits into our type of work. All right, let's do this with a couple other images and get into another topic. This is a similar photograph to one that I showed in another course, my daughter Annie, who I love so much. This one is going to start with a crop. The shortcut key for the crop tool is the R key, right. Shortcut key for the overlay in the crop is, I kind of gave it away, but it's O, yes, O for overlay. Yeah, I guess I didn't give it away quite. And then if we have a crop that has an orientation, let me make this black so you can see that. So we have one like this. If you press Shift-O, it just toggles through its different iterations. So you can always change that up with Shift-O. All right, so I'm going to get rid of the overlay or maybe go back to something just like the rule of thirds and bring back my exposure. Cropping, again, I'm just going to bring it in a little bit. Why do I always do that? The best photographs really pay attention to edges. And so if we're going to try to make strong photographs, we have to be so in tune with how we're using space and the space that's there. Ideally, I don't have to, but sometimes we do. So I'm always asking myself that and trying that out. With this image, I want to bring in some shadows. I need to bring her up a little bit more. It should be more golden, right? So I'll go up to my color temperature, bring some of that up. Not too far. Remember, that's not delicious food anymore. I'm not savoring that, right? It's like, it's I don't know what it is. It's a sandwich with like too much mustard on it. Mustard's a good thing, but don't, gotta, that was bad. But you gotta get something in there, but not too much. All right, a little bit of clarity, lost color on that one, so bring up my vibrance. Just want to keep opening it up, but I like the kind of feeling of this, but I want to bring more onto her. So we have a lot of selective adjustment tools, and one we've mentioned a few times in my courses is the radial filter. Radial filter has a shortcut associated with it, which is Shift-M. I almost gave it away, but the way you remember those is this one's M and then this one's Shift-M. So we'll grab that tool. Down below feather, so if we have no feather and if we apply a radial adjustment, it has a really harsh edge to it. And if we increase our feather slider, it has a soft edge to it. Right now it's darkening. We could also have it brightened. And that's what I want to do, brighten and maybe even a little more yellow, like bring a little bit more into that. It's almost like I have a flashlight, right? Or I'm lighting in post-production. And I've actually done a couple courses on that where using these selective adjustment tools to light your images. And there are, strangely, a lot of different parallels. So I'm going to try to find the right spot. My value is too high, but sometimes it's okay because that helps you find where it needs to be. Because if I really had it where I want it, which is probably down here, I wouldn't quite know exactly, it just gets you there quicker. So I have nice little exposure. The overlay's distracting me. You guys are getting sharp because I know you know what I'm doing next, right? Which is I want to hide the overlay. In this case, it's the H key because it's not the H and then just like, yeah, there's my smiling, Annie. I want to bring it back though so I can duplicate this one. Right click it or control click and choose duplicate. That gives me another one just sitting in the same spot, and this one I'm going to bring down to the lower area of her and have it be a little bit less strong. So just a little bit less there, maybe some contrast in that. Go back to the other one above, a little bit of contrast in there. And you get where we're going with it, right? What happens with photography is this. You start off with this image, and I'm so excited that my focus is there, that my daughter was there, that it was a field of flowers, because what happens with fields of flowers is a storm can come through and the flowers are gone, and it's wildflowers, it's springtime, and so I'm just like, yes, I'm, so victorious. But what we have to do is kind of say, okay, I haven't won the prize yet. And where could that go? And how can I bring that there? And so that's what this course is about. And it's really about just trying to think about software as a way to do that versus software as a way to maybe fix broken things. Or, we get in our little ruts. You ever get in a rut, anyone in here, where you're like, this is what I do? But it's like, no. How do I get out of that? All right, let's do another one. We'll go to Matt Kloskowski, the man himself. The man, the myth, the legend. Matt took me shooting. We were at this conference down at the ocean. which was really fun. He convinced me to get into this long exposure stuff, which is a new space for me. But anyway, this image, it's just like my surfer guy, right? The problem is that he's underexposed there in the shadows. So a couple ways we could do that to reiterate. Go up here just to be like, oh yeah, okay, that's the area of the shadows. You know, that's what my shadow slider doing. That's what I need to open up first. Whenever we open something up or brighten something up, it almost always needs to be given some contrast back to sort of correct for that adjustment that had happened there. So in this kind of an image, listening to it, it's about my buddy and him in the moment and trying to almost visually just remember like, okay, landscapes, get low to the water, wait, you know, long exposure. That's why I'm capturing this image. That's all I need to do, and that's fine. And sometimes post-production can be easy, and it doesn't always have to be a ton of steps. That being said, I'll do an image in Photoshop in a few minutes where we'll create, I think, like 8 different layers and adjustments. Sometimes it takes that. This one doesn't, right? Nice natural landscape. All right, let's do this. Because part of this isn't just tools, it is kind of the philosophy. And so from that perspective, I want you guys to ask each other a question. And the question is, how do you know when you're done with an image? Most people don't have an answer to it, and that's a problem. Because they're like, well, I just don't know. And then but we have to start to come up with, well, how do you know? And if you don't know, what do you tend to try? What do you do something? I ran out of time. Okay, you're done. Yeah, or whatever it is. So, and if you're watching this online, ask, too, write yourself down, how do you know when it's done? When's enough? 20 seconds, quick question, go for it.
I want to hear what your answer is, Chris.
Yes, I will give one. Okay, let's keep going. I have a question for Kenna, because we got to put her on the spot some.
All right.
Kenna, how do you know when you're done? There's no right or wrong to this, right, too? That's the beauty of it. How do you know when you're done?
I don't know if you're ever done, but
Sure.
For me, for that particular moment, when you just feel it. Maybe you kind of stop and feel like you need to walk away. Maybe though you come back, and then you try something more. But I don't know. I think I think I have to just call it actually, because I think I could with certain things keep going. What about you?
So I'm going to extrapolate from that. I'm very similar to your gut. Does anyone relate with that? And that there's no one who can tell you when they're done. Some people are like, oh, you're done. No, like you have no idea what's churning in my gut. And so gut and feeling and intuition is a huge part of photography, and being okay with that and in tune with that. And there's a lot of approaches. I think the guitarist in the famous band U2 said songs are never finished, they're just abandoned. And but it is kind of like, all right, I give up, I'm done, but trusting the gut. So part of what I'm trying to get you guys into is we have tools, we have workflow, we have ruts, we have all that, but we also have to listen. We're listening to the image, what's my thread? But then also we're paying attention to that. The artists who are the best are really, really in tune with that internal dialogue. And when I think they're done, they're not. Like I had one friend, I went and visited his studio. He shoots celebrities, and he's an amazing photographer, this guy, Jeff Lipsky. And he had this one print that he had just made, and I was like, whoa, I was seriously, I couldn't believe it. And he was like, oh man. And he tore it up, and he's like, that is like, I can't even believe, and he just went on and on. And he explained to me why he didn't like the print, but I couldn't figure it out. And so I said, can I keep your torn up pieces? And I have it in a file, and every once in a while I piece it together and try to figure out what's wrong with it. I don't see it. But what it was is for his gut, his intuition, he knew that didn't fit who he was, what he wanted to create, right? So it's not just tools, gut, intuition. So Ken, that was awesome.